Consultants and, oh, thank you, Jamie. We have Darton Riley Gibbons from CPH Consultants. They're the engineer working on this, and then Justin Holland from Prospect Development, the owner.
Okay, great.
Looks like we have one more
Perfect.
person from CPH.
Clay Loomis.
Okay, great.
So we'll get underway. Good afternoon, and we are of record. So my name is Mark Scheipmeyer. I'm the newly minted hearing examiner for the city of Gig Harbor. In fact, this is my first hearing being conducted for the city. Although it's the first such hearing for Gig Harbor, it's not my first hearing as a hearing examiner. I've been doing this for about 30 years for roughly 15 or so jurisdictions. So in advance of today's hearing, I have received materials relating to the preliminary plat application presented for the reserve, bearing the case number PL-PPLAT 220001, an application for a 14-lot single-family residential preliminary plat on 9.8 acres located along Peacock Hill Avenue near its intersection with 100th Street Court. Again, in advance of today's hearing, I received a staff report authored by Roxanne Robles. I've reviewed that report in its entirety. I have reviewed all other materials that came with that report, including all public comment, which I've read several times to make fully certain that I'm aware of all public comment that's been presented relating to this application. I've also reviewed the prior decision for the same project issued in 2017. And I'm familiar with both that decision and the discussion that took place as part of that earlier decision. So in all respects, I feel I'm familiar with the application and all materials. Purpose of today's hearing is to receive testimony from 3 parties relating to this application. First is from city staff, who I anticipate will be Ms. Robles. It may be other staff members as well. Once staff has completed its presentation, provide an opportunity for the applicant to make a follow-up presentation, expanding or subtracting from what the city has recommended and any reasons why, followed then by public testimony. And I am uncertain as to the amount of public presence there is today. My screen is not really making that clear, and so I'm not sure if we have members of the public present. We'll find out at the appropriate time. And there's always, as it goes with public testimony in remote hearings, in that trying to determine those who are interested and then establishing an order for those people to speak. But we'll figure that out when we come to it. In advance of that, however, there are a few, I hope, hopeful recommendations as to that testimony. First of all, this is not a political process. This is a fact-finding process. I'm sitting in the same capacity as a judge would in hearing, say, a trial. I'm receiving facts and making factual determinations and legal conclusions based upon the facts I receive. I'm not interested in opinions. I'm not interested in popularity of projects or lack of popularity. Those are things that I'm not allowed to consider in my decision-making process. And so if you're wishing to testify, it's important that you recognize that what I am concerned with or most interested in are facts. And so if you wish to testify, I would suggest not doing it such as Mr. Hearing Examiner, I'm opposed to this project, and then not having anything further to say. Your opposition alone isn't very useful to me as information. On the other hand, if you were to say, Mr. Hearing Examiner or Mr. Scheipmeyer, I'm opposed to this application for the following 4 reasons. It's those 4 reasons that I'm interested in and want to hear more about. So if you are a member of the public and you want to give testimony, you'll be sworn. I'll have you identify yourself and your residency, and then you're free to speak whatever you wish to say. I'll try not to interrupt you unless I'm trying to clarify a point that you're making. Otherwise, I'm going to leave you alone. And you're not subject to cross-examination unless you're claiming to be an expert on some issue, in which case you open yourself to cross-examination as to that expertise. There aren't a lot of other restrictions I'm imposing on testimony. I don't anticipate such a large crowd today that I feel the need to impose time limits other than say a general 10-minute time limit on individual testimony of members of the public. 10 minutes is an extremely long period of time, and it would be unusual for anyone to testify that long. So those are my basic rules. We'll get underway with presentation by city staff. All who testify today, including staff and the applicant, will be sworn under oath. And so we'll begin with Ms. Robles. Ms. Robles, do you swear or affirm to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
I do.
Go ahead.
Okay. Are you all able to see this screen?
I am, yes.
Okay, great. So we're talking about the preliminary plat for the reserve. There are also 3 other associated permit numbers, one for design review, one for the alternative landscape plan, and one for the SEPA determination. The applicant's request is to develop 2 contiguous parcels totaling 9.88 acres into 14 single-family lots. The development is proposed to take place within the western 5.27 acres of the site closest to Peacock Hill Avenue as shown in this site plan. The eastern portion of the site is limited by a Category 3 wetland, a stream, and steep topography. The 2 parcels located east of the intersection of Peacock Hill Avenue and 100th Street Court total 9.88 acres. You can see the parcel numbers up on the screen. The sites are zoned single-family residential, or as we say in Gig Harbor, R1. Access will be from Peacock Hill Avenue. The site is currently forested with native vegetation and trees. So the site is zoned R1. Adjacent properties are also zoned single family, with the exception of the RB1 zone catty corner to the southwest. That's a mixed use zone, but is currently used for single family use. The zone to the immediate east is Pierce County, and it is zoned rural sensitive resource. Both the properties to the north and south are also within Pierce County. The applicant requested a deviation from strict requirements of Gig Harbor Municipal Code. I'll abbreviate that as GHMC 1799-240C, which requires development to design buildings and parking lots to fit natural slopes rather than regrading. This section also requires cuts and fills to be balanced with no retaining walls in excess of 6 feet. The site has challenging topography and slopes east from Peacock Hill Avenue at approximately 15% grade. The slopes on the easternmost portion of the site vary up to 30%. So the applicant requested deviation from this balanced notion of cut and fill to be able to use a part of the steep proportion and avoid kind of extreme grading and fill on site. The proposed grading scheme is outlined on sheet C3 of Exhibit B, the site plan set, and utilizes about 23,640 cubic yards of import fill and 5,341 cubic yards of cut to accomplish the development. The design review board offered a recommendation to the hearing examiner to approve this deviation. The proposal is also going to use 15 retaining walls and a stormwater vault that reaches 15 feet in height. What you're seeing here is a section cut of the stormwater vault. The walls which exceed 6 foot height requirement are around the stormwater vault in the northern portion of the development. The tallest wall will be 15.1 feet. The northeast wall faces a residential subdivision to the north and will be obscured by at least 50 feet of vegetated buffer. The southeast wall faces the open space and critical areas tract and will not be visible from within the development. The design review board recommendation is included as Exhibit B. There are a couple environmental concerns on site. There is a Category 3 wetland and a Type 4 or non-fish bearing type stream. Wetland A requires 150-foot buffer and a 15-foot structure setback per GHMC 1808-100, and the stream requires a 25-foot buffer and a 15-foot structure setback. These are both captured in the applicant's site plan. The project site also contains some steep slopes, landslide and erosion hazard areas predominantly in the eastern portion of the site, which will remain largely undeveloped. The geotechnical report included as Exhibit G found no geotechnical conditions which would preclude the planned development. And it recommended the import of free draining granular material for use as structural fill rather than site soils if it would be constructed during wet conditions. Site stormwater is going to be routed to a detention vault, which was shown, a section of which was shown in a previous slide, located in the northeast portion of the development area. Based on the project proposal, environmental conditions and environmental reports, the city issued a SEPA determination of non-significance on April 12th. The SEPA DNS determination is included as Exhibit H. There have been several public concerns about containment of stormwater and spills from the right-of-way in this development. And with regard to these concerns, anything that is not immediately contained, such as like a spill, would end up in stormwater and wastewater systems. That's not unique to this development. Constructing this project without a stormwater system would be radically more detrimental to both public health and critical areas because of the impervious surface being introduced by the development. Stormwater catchment systems are designed to contain and treat stormwater and wastewater specifically so that surges from storms or accidents do not overwhelm natural systems, and stormwater engineering and systems are, again, not unique to this project. You'll see the site plan on the screen shows the location of a detention vault and also the stormwater system, which would convey treated stormwater to a dispersion trench. The applicant has prepared a preliminary drainage control plan included as Exhibit U, along with the proposed storm system layout and the reference plans to document the preliminary engineering design. The proposed development will be required to provide both water quality control or treatment and water quality quantity control or detention and controlled release per the Gig Harbor Stormwater Management and Site Development Manual. The current proposal will meet water quality requirements through this underground detention system and water quantity requirements with storm filter cartridges. The plan for this development, and CPH may be able to go into more detail during their presentation, but is that stormwater will be released at controlled intervals and dispersed through a 10-foot dispersion trench to avoid erosion of the steep slopes. The controlled release of treated stormwater is necessary for the continued recharge of the adjacent wetland. And this is again a site section of the proposed stormwater vault on site. So the idea is that stormwater will travel into this vault and that any metals or solid materials will settle out and then move through the filter cartridges and be released to the adjacent open area. Public notice was conducted by the city. We had a notice of application in February. We received 2 comments. Notice of public meeting in August. We had 4 comments, or excuse me, it's like 6, several from the same individual. We also notified the public of our SEPA DNS and received several comments, and then 1 comment from the notice of public hearing for this hearing. Some other considerations for this project, they applied for an alternative landscape plan. The planning director may authorize modification of the landscape requirements in GHMC Chapter 1778 when alternative landscape plans comply with the intent of that chapter, and propose a superior result than what would be achieved by following the strict requirements. So, and incorporates the increased retention of significant trees. So the applicant proposed an alternative landscape plan to remove 29 non-viable significant trees and 21 viable significant trees, and proposed 97 replacement trees, which exceeds the requirements of GHMC 1778-060-2D, delivering 1 tree per 150 square feet, exceeding the required 1 tree per 200 square feet. The applicant is also proposing landscaping along the eastern boundary to screen the exposed face of the stormwater vault. So part of this alternative landscape plan is to utilize ceilings rather than 2-inch or 6-foot trees, as there is not sufficient room in the landscape perimeter for trees of that size to grow properly. The arborist report included as Exhibit C notes that the planting of seedlings is desirable over planting of 2-inch diameter trees because seedlings are much quicker to establish new roots and generate healthy root systems that can withstand drought for longer periods of time. Given the trend of hotter and drier summers, seedlings are preferable over larger stock, and larger planting stock usually take a longer time to become established. They also typically require supplemental irrigation for a longer period if they're to survive. So the project proposal through this plan will retain approximately 67.5% of significant trees. The strict requirement is 25% significant tree retention. And more than half of the project site will remain undeveloped. The removal of 21 viable trees within the landscape perimeter is in service of reducing the footprint of the overall development and necessary earthwork to avoid potential stormwater runoff and erosion. And then our code requires that the landscaping survive and is replaced within a 1-year period. And if necessary, the city will leverage a performance bond to make sure that the landscape survives. So I won't read all of this, but staff has made findings that this preliminary plat conforms to all of the general requirements for a subdivision, and it looks out for public health and safety. We also found that the alternative landscape plan provides a superior result than what would be achieved by strictly following the requirements of this chapter. And the design review board provided a recommendation to the hearing examiner to approve the proposed grading plan and retaining walls taller than 6 feet. So staff recommends approval with 10 land use conditions and 10 engineering conditions.
Thank you. Some technical issues first. So with the requested design variances proposed by the design review board, those come to me as recommendations for my final decision making. As to the alternate landscape plan, is that decided by the director or is that decided by me as well?
That is decided, sorry, I can stop sharing. That's decided by the hearing examiner with a recommendation from staff.
So
in this case,
it's of the same nature then as the variance request.
yes,
Okay.
because it's being reviewed under the highest number application.
Okay, I'm unable to recognize any clear distinctions between this application and the earlier one heard in 2017. I did not receive all of those materials, just the decision, but it spoke of a similar 14 lot subdivision. Was it quite similar to this one?
Yes.
Okay. A few questions in no particular order. This is an unusual bump out of city limits into what is otherwise county jurisdiction. Is there a particular reason why this one piece of property juts into the county, extending the city just this lot and no others? What's going on?
Not that I'm aware of, no.
Okay, so there was nothing special about this place or deemed different than the adjoining properties?
No.
Okay. Looking to the subdivision in the county immediately north, it looks to be quite similar in its layout. Is that a fair analysis?
Yes, I'd say so.
Okay. The neighborhood across the street to the west has expressed concerns about the entrance they don't go into detail, but they express concern about that entrance, perhaps because of its location, perhaps because of the grade at the entrance level. But to the extent that the neighbors are concerned about the nature of the entrance into this property, how might you respond to those concerns?
I believe the entrance received variances to avoid additional grading. It was I think it was a decision based on grading, and our Public Works Department has reviewed it and deemed it safe. And then I believe the consultant has also offered adding right-of-way improvements like a sidewalk and pedestrian lights. So that is meant to be kind of like a gesture to the public to enhance pedestrian safety in that area.
And then there has been this continuous concern expressed by several neighbors as to the, well, this is simply too steep a slope for safe design, for safe stormwater management, for safe overall development. Are there any, is there any empirical evidence of this general slope, north and south of this property having or being problematic as other development has taken place along this east facing slope? Is there historical evidence that its development is problematic?
Not that I'm aware of, and we're not aware of any landslides as a result of developments to the north and south.
Okay, all right. I think those complete my questions. There may be more that are generated based upon any additional testimony, either by the applicant or perhaps by the public. And so we'll turn in now to, I'm sorry, before we turn to the applicant, Ms. Robles, is there anything else that the city wishes to present?
No, thank you.
Oh, okay. So then we'll turn to the applicant. And Mr. Holland, am I to anticipate your testimony or would it be someone else?
Mr. Examiner, I'll be speaking for the applicant today.
Oh, okay. And it's Darton and the last name is Riley?
It's Riley. It's a fun hyphenated last name. It's Riley Gibbons. So it's all one last name.
Okay.
Gibbons. And the Riley spelled a little strange. It's RIELY-GIBBONS.
Okay. And I think we're all having some difficulty with bandwidth issues. There was a bit with Ms. Robles, not much, a little bit more with you, Darton. And so we'll be careful about that. If we're having severe trouble, I'll let you know. But first of all, let's have you sworn. Do you swear or affirm to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
I do.
Go ahead.
Well, first I want to thank Mr. Hearing Examiner for presiding over this and reviewing this, as well as the staff of Gig Harbor. They've been excellent to work through. It's been a long process coordinating and collaborating with them to get to this point here. And I appreciate their efforts and communication with us during that process. I did provide, I was sharing my screen. I did provide a little presentation here. Because similar to, I was aware of the comments coming in, and particularly into regards to the stormwater aspect of the development. And so general project information. I'm once again Darton Riley Gibbons. I'm a civil engineer, professional licensed civil engineer in the state of Washington with CPH Consultants. We also have, we did the landscaping portion with that. Dave Andrews, our resident landscape, and then of course the applicant and owner of the property, Justin Holland, with Prospect Development, and then also Clay Loomis, who's a project manager with them, is here as well today. As Roxanne touched on, it's 2 parcels, totaling 9.8 acres. The area we're disturbing is approximately only about 35% of the site, and this is due to some of these sensitive areas and steeper slopes on the east side of the site. And then the actual lot area the homes will be built on is about 3.1 or 31% of the site. And then we're only putting down approximately 19% of hard surfaces, roads, sidewalks, roofs, driveways on the site. And this is kind of, as Roxanne showed, this is kind of the layout of the site. We have this very large open space track to preserve our critical areas and also our steep slopes. You can see here on the sheet, we have identified the wetland as well as its buffer and the top of kind of some of the more 30% range slopes on the site.
If you're sharing, I'm not seeing
Oh, is
your
it not
shared
showing up?
information. No.
I apologize. I not click something. Oh,
Not receiving. Oh, okay, hold on.
there we go. Can you see now?
I'm being alerted that you've started share screening or screen sharing, but I haven't received the material yet.
I can talk through my slides if that the bandwidth is an issue.
Yes.
I also have your presentation and I can pull it up if you
Oh
just
yeah, that'd
wanna
be great.
tell me, you know, when to go to the next slide.
Fantastic. Thank you, Roxanne.
I should note that the city sent me its PowerPoint presentation earlier today. Did it also send me the applicants?
No, but I can send that afterward,
Okay.
unless you want that now.
If you would, I'd appreciate that.
Sure.
Yeah, if you can go to the next slide, Roxanne. Thank you.
Sure.
And these first few would just kind of be things that you've already very well gone over. I talked about this kind of our project team and general location of our project. Next slide, please.
Go on.
As I kind of touched on and Roxanne touched on, its total parcel area with the two combined parcels of 9.88 acres. We are developing and disturbing the western 35.2% roughly of the site. And the total actual lot area in which will encompass the homes would be about 31% of the project. And then as I was talking about, there is only about 19% of the in total 9.8 acres that it will be turned into hard surface, your roofs, driveways, sidewalks, and those type of materials. The rest will be landscaping, lawn, and then of course forested, majority of the site to the east. And next slide, please. And we went over the development, the 14 units. We have a dedicated stormwater track as well as a open space track, which will contain and protect the wetlands and the buffers and the steep slopes existing on site from further development. And as you can see, the over half of the site will be preserved for these critical areas. And next slide, please. As Roxanne talked about, there's a significant Gig Harbor takes great pride in their trees, and there's a significant portion we need to go through as developing a site to ensure that we are protecting as much significant trees. And the significant trees are your larger diameter trees that you'll have in a forest area, and the healthier ones. We are proposing to remove some of these, but as Roxanne, we are going above and beyond code requirements to replace them. And so this slide kind of shows some of the significant trees around the site that we'll be saving. Roxanne, we have the next slide. And then this adds into the additional landscaping and added trees that we're providing with the development to create a screening buffer that kind of meets and exceeds the requirements of the city. Next slide. Since there were the comments seemed to be primarily related to stormwater, there was a couple things that I wanted to hit on when talking about those. All projects must comply with the city code, which are based on state stormwater codes. And for our project and some of the concerns from the public, there are 4 kind of crucial elements of this mitigation I wanted to go over. They would be, collection and conveyance, flow control, water quality, and then wetland protection. The first one, collection and conveyance. Roxanne, if you can go to the next slide. The site has various, as an underground stormwater collection system that's in part of the design. I've highlighted these on this graphic with blue circles here. These catch basins will pick up the storm water coming off the lots area, and landscaping, as well as the roads and sidewalks and driveways. And then the green line shown here will be roof connections for the house's gutter systems to directly connect those to our stormwater system. So all the stormwater on site will be collected in these catch basins and then conveyed, as Roxanne talked about, to our underground detention vault in the northeast corner of the developed part of the site. Prior to getting to the detention vault, stormwater will go through treatment and then flow control and then be released. But the first element of the stormwater system is getting it there. And this kind of graphic is depicting how we are collecting and conveying that stormwater to our respective facilities. Next slide, please. So then flow control, we have a underground detention vault, which is also doubling as a retaining wall for the site. And of course, this has been reviewed by structural engineers as well as geotechnical engineers to ensure stability and structural integrity of this vault and its location. The vault will hold about 47,000 cubic feet or 350,000 gallons of stormwater. The idea of this vault is it fills up with stormwater and then control releases it. So that you can see in this graphic, without controlled release, as Roxanne mentioned, without any stormwater flow control, when you add impervious surface, it takes all that precipitation and it gets it to your end and peaks up much quicker than it would in the orange line of what would be before urbanization or before development in a forested condition, where the peak would be much gradual and it would slow out. The detention vault basically takes that lot more volume coming in quicker, holds it, and then slowly releases it, similar to what would happen in a forested or natural condition. Next slide. For treatment for this project, we're using a manufactured treatment facility. It's by a company called Contact. They are all over the state of Washington. They have these cartridges where stormwater comes into these units, it's filtered through the cartridges and then comes into the default as clean. And now these have been sized based on our analysis and our design through the storm event and the hydrology of the site, in conjunction with Contact, who runs them through and provides us with the proper sizing and number of these cartridges we need to treat the stormwater appropriately per state and city standards. Next slide, please. And finally, the last element, since we have an on-site wetland, we need to be very cognizant of wetland protection. In the City of Gig Harbor Stormwater Management Manual, which is based off the Department of Ecology's and Pierce County and other manuals throughout the state that dictate water quality and wetland protection and dealing with sensitive areas. Part of this development will be looking at the upland basin of our wetland, as well as what we contribute, comparing the current conditions of what the wetland's receiving to what they would look like when we're done developing our site and our system is activated and releasing stormwater. There are a few elements that we want to look at when we're analyzing wetland protection. That would be first, what we talked about earlier, the flow control. If you're releasing too higher flow rates, there could be consequences for the downstream streams. And so that's where we come in and we're detaining our flow to release it closer to what would be seen in a forest from a forested area. Second is we also want to look at volume of water. Like we talked about, the volume comes a lot quicker. It is a similar amount, but there is more, slightly more due to not as much water being retained on trees, but we are able to control that. And we look at analysis from before our project to after our project, and we make sure that volume does not exceed a 20% increase or a decrease when releasing our volume to the wetland. Then third, we talked about pollutants. We're treating the stormwater before it reaches this wetland. The stormwater will be treated per city standards and then released down into the wetland as treated stormwater. And we will not be, it meets all your basic treatment requirements before getting to the wetland. And third, in this case, where we do have a steep slope coming down to a wetland, we want to try and protect slopes and the soils from erosion. Water at high velocity can cause quite a bit of erosion. So the system's designed from the vault up on the hill through a tight line system, which means the pipes are fused together and held together very strongly down the slope and anchored into the slope, to a energy dissipator, which is a big rock pad that will the water will hit it because it'll be coming quite quickly down the slope. It will slow that water down, remove the energy out of it that's built up coming down the hill, and then it will go into 2 10-foot dispersion trenches on either side. And then these dispersion trenches basically fill the water up and then allow it to evenly flow out over that 20-foot length. So then you're replicating kind of a sheet flowing of water rather than a concentrated form of water that in concentrated water is typically what's associated with erosion in stream banks and things like that. So if you're spreading that water over the thing, you're reducing your potential for eroding any part of that wetland, its bank, its buffer, or any areas like that. So those were the 4 crucial elements that we are considering when we're designing this system and looking through it. And that's kind of how we are complying with them in this specific project. And that's kind of the presentation I had.
Okay, I appreciate that. I don't think I have any questions. Thank you.
Thank you.
And would that conclude then the applicant's presentation?
Yes.
Okay, so Ms. Robles or Ms. Thomas, can you tell me whether there are any members of the public who appear to be present today?
There are 11.
11, okay, because I'm not seeing anything on my screen. And so I'll turn to you, Ms. Thomas, to advise me or to arrange for a determination of who among them wishes to be heard. And then if you'll arrange an order for them to be heard. So if I can have you address that and then let me know who I am to be hearing from, that would be great.
Roxy, how does Michelle usually do that? Does she just have them raise their hands?
Oh, I'm sorry. It's not Ms. Thomas either. I apologize.
It's totally okay. It's totally
I
okay.
Yeah, that's fine. Yes, if you're a panelist, or excuse me, if you're a member of the public who would like to testify, please use the Zoom function to raise your hand and we will put you in a queue to speak. Okay, looks like we have 2 members of the public. We have John McMillan and Elizabeth Wingren. I hope I'm saying that correctly. You're going to hear from, oh, and also Tony DeMarco. You'll hear from John McMillan first.
Okay, so if Mr. McMillan can be unmuted.
Mhm.
All right, good afternoon, Mr. McMillan. First, have you sworn? Do you swear or affirm to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
I do.
Thank you. And not that it has any significance, but I do want to alert you that I have reviewed all of your 4 or 5 previous public comments carefully and perhaps a couple of times. Not that's in turn, I'm not saying that to discourage you from saying the same things again, but simply to let you know that I have reviewed all of your prior comments fully and carefully, and whether you want to take that in consideration is up to you. So go ahead.
Yeah, I appreciate your reviewing the comments that I submitted. To be brief, I guess one of the principal concerns I have seen no reference or any comments about how water quality is monitored, either as a benchmark test prior to the development, which would be a wise thing to do, and then subsequent tests periodically. As homes are being built, it could take, 10, 20 years for all the homes to be built. And I would expect that monitoring to continue during those time periods to ensure that the environment is protected on the stream that flows at the southeast portion of the subject property. I'm very concerned, sure, maybe no landslides, things like that, but I doubt whether anyone has checked water quality from subdivisions that have and developments that have occurred on the western bank of Crescent Valley. So those are my concerns. It's a pristine valley and very critical. Anything that would happen to this development would critically harm everything in that southeast corner. So I'd like to know if such monitoring will occur, and if not, why not?
Mr. McMillan, I lost you, or I was lost for a brief period there. And so you were starting to summarize some of your testimony, and my screen went blank and I lost connection to you. So where to begin? You had begun to explain your residency nearby, your concerns. And beyond that, I'm not certain what you said.
Well, I don't know what you heard or didn't hear. Should I just do the whole thing over again? To be brief, I just want to make sure that the quality of water is both tested and monitored as a benchmark prior to development, and then in subsequent years as homes are developed and built on the site. Did you hear me that time?
Okay, I did. Anything else, Mr. McMillan?
Not sure what you heard or didn't hear, but that's my concern is why, my question is, why have there not been any talk of monitoring the quality of water that ends up at the southeast corner of the subject property? Is there not that much of a concern for the environment to ensure that water is tested and monitored periodically for years to come?
Okay, understood. And anything else that you would like to say?
That's it. That's my greatest concern is the environment. I'm just worried that that's
Okay.
not being cared for.
So noted. Ms. Robles, you had identified a woman next, but I did not get a chance to write her name down. Who was that?
Elizabeth Wingren, Elizabeth Wingren.
Okay. And Ms. Withgren, I do not see you yet on my screen. Do not know if you, there you go. You haven't yet been unmuted. There we are. So I'll have you sworn. Do you swear or affirm to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
Yeah, I do.
Okay, thank you. And go ahead.
During the applicant's presentation, two questions came to mind, and I apologize in advance if this isn't the appropriate venue to ask these questions. These are questions that represent perhaps a water quality concern mentioned by the last person. I was wondering whose responsibility.
Ms. Wingren,
Yeah.
may I promised that I wouldn't interrupt, and here I'm interrupting you. I'm doing that for an important purpose, which is something I forgot to mention in my opening remarks. And that is to the extent that members of the public have questions, what I'll do is have you pose them to me, and I'll then determine the appropriate parties to tender those to. So yes, questions are fully legitimate. They're an excellent purpose of testimony. But instead of asking someone directly, I'll have you give them to me, and I'll then serve as traffic cop for those questions. So go ahead.
So I can still ask the questions.
Yes.
Okay, thank you. Whose responsibility will it be to manage the stormwater treatment facility? And the second question is essentially, how how, will there be any kind of limitations on like lawn chemicals that the people owning those houses can use so that they don't somehow flow downhill and enter the wetland? You know, is the stormwater treatment facility adequate to treat any kind of, you know, plant poison or, you know, whatever lawn care chemicals a homeowner might throw on their ground in that property? Thank you for listening to my questions.
Certainly, thank you. And then I understood earlier, Ms. Robles, that Tony DeMarco is your third person, is that correct?
Yes.
And so, Mr. DeMarco, you are on my screen. You haven't yet been unmuted. There we go. Do you swear or affirm to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
I do.
And Mr. DeMarco, just like Mr. Williams, you are the author of a public comment that's been co-signed by 20 or 30 of your neighbors. I, again, received that in advance of the hearing. I reviewed that. Not, again, I'm telling you that only to make you aware of that fact, not to discourage you from saying any of the same things again. So go ahead.
Well, I was certainly not going to take everybody's time up by repeating the obvious. I guess I'm not being a scientist. I'm not going to be able to blind everybody with all these facts and figures. That's not my profession. What I would like to say today is that I find it disappointing that the Gig Harbor Planning Commission saw reasonable to present these exemptions to this project. When you hear them state over and over that this seems like a very unnatural site to be building homes in. The amount of work that's going to go into just trying to control this project it sounds astounding to me. The fact that Gig Harbor has already met its requirements as of right now for the state Growth Management Act, and the conversations you hear about the need for affordable housing, by the time this developer is done doing all this control work and all this vault work and mediation work, these houses are certainly not going to be at a price point that would be considered affordable housing. So once again, we're not solving that immediate problem either. So I would just say that I'm really surprised that they're trying to, how you just say, fit a square peg in a round hole. That's all I'm said. Today, I appreciate your time, Mr. Examiner.
Thank you, Mr. DeMarco. Ms. Robles, you had earlier indicated those are the three individuals who expressed a wish to testify. Do you have anyone else who is expressing a similar wish?
I see no other hands raised.
Let me just ask one last time. Are there any members of the public who have not yet been heard who wish to be heard? And are you receiving any response, Ms. Robles?
No.
Okay, let's turn back to the city and then the applicant. So Mr. McMillan and Ms. Wingren asked what are relatively identical questions, minor deviations, but basically the same sets of questions. And so let's return to those questions and afford an opportunity by both the city and the applicant to respond. And so again, and as to the city, if you want to defer to the applicant, and Ms. Robles, you're free to do that as well, or you're certainly free to call in other staff as well. So you heard Mr. McMillan's concerns about monitoring water quality, partly to establish a pre-development standard, and then also to maintain or monitor the project during its build out. Ms. Wingren asked a similar question as to responsibility for managing that stormwater system during the life of the project, or basically here forward. And then might there be limitations imposed on the chemicals used on lawns and other types of potentially toxic materials that could be sent downstream to this system? So those are the questions that were posed by these witnesses. Ms. Robles, how might you respond to those questions?
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Examiner. I responded to a similar question from John McMillan on May 18th in an email. He asked about who is tasked with monitoring water quality out of the vault and the ravine at the Gabion outfall. I responded that the owner, the future homeowners association, so the owner of the stormwater facility, which will be the homeowners association in the future, is required to ensure safe and compliant maintenance and operation of the stormwater system per the stormwater maintenance agreement, which includes a source control manual and standards for water quality. So the stormwater maintenance agreement is something that's executed between the homeowners association and the city, and it requires them to comply with all of the standards of our stormwater quality manual, and that they maintain it with regard to the stormwater maintenance agreement and the stormwater manual, which is designed to meet state standards for water quality, control, detention, and release. And the stormwater system will be inspected by the city at installation. And then if
Those
there's anything,
steps, are they any, oh, go ahead.
I was just going to say that I defer to the applicant if I missed any kind of technical parts of how water quality is tested.
The things that you have described, are they any less or more than what you would expect of any other subdivision in the city?
No. And it's also worth noting that the stormwater requirements do not vest to the date of the subdivision. So date of application, excuse me. So while this application was made in 2022, they need to meet the standards of 2023 or whenever their engineering permit is approved.
Thank you. Turning then to the applicant, Mr. Riley-Gibbons, you've heard the questions that were posed by Mr. McMillan, Ms. Wingren. You've heard the city's response. Does the applicant have its own response?
Yeah, I'll reiterate what Roxanne explained. There are two documents in direct relation to the maintaining the facility and what comes off the site to the facility. Like Roxanne explained, there's a source control manual that's part of the approved documents that outlines what kind of approved uses and how to manage certain issues that are typical with a residential development like this. And then secondly, these operations and maintenance manual, which directs the owner of the facility, which in this case will be the homeowners association of the plat, how to operate, maintain, inspect, and ensure that the water quality facility, as well as the vault and the dispersion system and all elements of the stormwater system are operating properly. And there is a maintenance agreement that will be assigned with the city when the project is finalized and final plat is approved, that will put in place agreement between the homeowners association and the city of Gig Harbor to ensure that that is done. As far as different types of spills and things, that's kind of what the source control, it just looks at you can't predict what everybody's going to do, but it looks at a general residential community and directs certain typical issues that may come up from that kind of use and gives guidance to how to deal with those in that source control manual.
I was going to, you anticipated my last question in large part, but so with a more specific question related to Ms. Wingren's as to lawn maintenance, et cetera. What might we typically see in the source control manual?
It would be, it'd be like from the most basic thing of how to washing your car. Most people don't think about the soaps and detergents that are going there. There's recommendations against doing that, against how to properly protect your drains from going to. There's stenciling that are done on catch basins, directing people that these are drained to streams. There's informational things like that that a homeowner association can do. And then there's also part of that is just maintaining and keeping things in good working order. A lot of them are, obviously we don't know what kind of residents getting there, so they're taken from the Department of Ecology in the city of Gig Harbor, an overall review of things they'd be looking at to be concerned with. Obviously it can't be specific to the owner, individual owner, who, as we don't know what that will be, but it's about as broad and specific as it can for different types of residential developments.
Right. And I'll turn that back around, Ms. Robles. You've heard the applicant's response, and on top of yours, anything that it's caused you to say in further response?
I had raised my hand because I realized that I didn't address Elizabeth Wingren's question about chemicals and different pesticides that might be applied on a lawn. But yeah, as the applicant said, the Stormwater Manual goes over best practices for the HOA to kind of disseminate among the members, and that is part of what the stormwater filtration system is there for, and also the ability for solids and chemicals to settle out. We don't have resources to kind of like police or control every single person and what they put on their lawns, but the city is working on updated regulations for low water and low maintenance landscaping to hopefully avoid more pesticides and things of that nature in private development.
Okay. All right, thank you. We've heard from the city, we've heard the applicant's presentation, we've now heard from the public, and we've allowed an opportunity for response by both city and the applicant. So we have concluded all aspects of the public hearing. I'm going to go ahead and approve the the preliminary plat application consistent with the conditions recommended by staff. I'm going to approve the requested deviations, variances recommended by the design review board from some of the technical standards. I'm going to also approve the alternate landscaping plan, all as part of an overall approval of the preliminary plat. I am highly sensitive to the concerns expressed by the neighbors and others nearby on the effect of this project. I understand those concerns. They're legitimate concerns. They're well-voiced concerns. But I've also thought about every one of those concerns as I've read this material again and again to see if or not these concerns have been addressed, and I conclude that they have been adequately addressed. I find that this has been a highly engineered project that has carefully considered all of these unusual aspects of the site, and therefore I'm comfortable with project approval. I must also add that I am extremely mindful that virtually the same identical project was approved 6 years ago. For me to deviate from that earlier decision, I would have to find something substantially materially different, either as to the application or as to circumstances since then. Otherwise, I would be disregarding a carefully considered prior decision by the hearing examiner, and I would not do that lightly. So while I am not bound by that decision, I also must give it full faith and recognize and respect it unless I find circumstances to have so changed or some aspect of that project being so different from this one that it's no longer applicable. I don't find that. I find it's virtually the same project under virtually identical regulations with identical issues. And therefore, I feel highly bound by the earlier hearing examiner's decision, not cemented to it, but closely bound to it. And that fact, coupled with my own examination of the current application, which I am supportive of, leads me to a strong finding that this preliminary plat should be approved. Now, my having done so orally is merely an opening step. At this point, I must now reduce my decision to three things: a set of findings of fact, a set of conclusions of law that flow from those findings, and finally, the decision with the conditions attached to that. The conditions are going to be the same ones as recommended by city staff. The findings and conclusions are things I create myself, and it takes a little bit of time to do that, especially for a complicated plat such as this. So I will begin work as soon as I can on those findings and conclusions of law and the decision itself, and submit that back to the city within a relatively short period of time. Those who are interested, those who have appeared today and have participated, are certainly entitled to seek copies. What you'll want to do is simply reach out to Ms. Robles for copies of my decision once rendered. And I appreciate the time that people have taken both today, earlier, to comment on this project. That's not easy always, and nor is it ever pleasant to speak publicly. I do respect those efforts. I'm not discounting them in any way, but rather I appreciate them greatly, and I'll seek to reciprocate by trying to make my decision as articulate as the testimony I was given today. Again, I'll get underway with that as soon as I can. That will conclude this hearing, and then we'll switch to a second hearing scheduled for today. And Ms. Robles or other staff, Mr. Hammer, how might you suggest that we make that transition?
I'm not sure. I think maybe stop this recording
Yeah, we
and
can
then
stop
start a
and
new
start
one with the
another
new.
I'm sorry.
Okay, so I'll ask staff to end this recording and then alert me when we're recording again.